This week on The Watchman, wars and rumors of wars, with Iran's regime vowing revenge over the loss of two of its leading figures. Both Israel and the United States have been on war footing. But will a new U.S. administration take a different approach?
If you screen across the region, I'm talking about the major Arab states, the Gulf monarchies, Egypt, and I'm adding to that Israel. They look at the new administration, and one of the most significant parameters is whether this administration is going back to the days of President Barack Obama.
Plus, the Israel Defense Forces international spokesman joins us to break down how Israel is guarding against game-changing Iranian precision missiles. All that and much more, only right here on The Watchman. And welcome to The Watchman. Things are rapidly heating up in the Middle East right now, and we want to get you up to speed on all of the latest developments. Number one, the Iranian regime continues to threaten revenge over the deaths of its terror kingpin Qasem Soleimani and Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program. As a result, the U.S. and Israeli militaries have been on high alert and have warned Iran of serious consequences if it attempts any sort of attack. Which brings us to number two. Both the U.S. and Israel have put muscle behind their warnings. In recent weeks, both nations have sent submarines into the Persian Gulf to send a message to Iran. The U.S. has also flown B-52 bombers over the Gulf, and the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier remains in the region. Number three, Iran is sending messages of its own. The Iranians have recently conducted major military drills involving attack drones, long-range missiles, and warships. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, Iran is enriching uranium at a rapid clip and speeding up its march to a nuclear bomb. At the same time, the Biden administration wants to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal, which President Trump pulled America out of in 2018. So much is happening in the world's most pivotal and chaotic region that we turn now to Israeli intelligence analyst Avi Melamed, who breaks down all of these events and what comes next. Take a look. Iran talking about revenge for the deaths of Qasem Soleimani and Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. What is the latest? Do you see the Iranian regime trying to retaliate for the deaths of those two crucial figures in their regime?
If they are going to retaliate or to take revenge, it has to be something significant and powerful enough. I published a couple of weeks ago an article analyzing the different ins and outs from an Iranian perspective. And I actually said, look, they have different plethoras and different means to retaliate. I was talking about the different capacities. But my conclusion was that when you take all these ingredients and you put them in the blender, sort of speaking, I think that the Iranians more likely will try to go in one of the two following directions. One is the issue of cyber attack, which the Iranians has capacities. Doing cyber attack is, on the one hand, can cause substantial damage if it's successful, but also it can, in a way, provide the Iranian an immune, because either if there is going to be a counter cyber attack, the Iranian could always, in a way, denies that, and so they will keep their face. We should pay attention to the fact that Iran actually has an operational cooperation with Sunni militant Islamic organization like Al-QAEDA. And you may remember a couple of months ago, a senior Al-QAEDA member, the second one in command, was eliminated in Tehran. This is not something new. I mean, the relationship between Iran and Al-QAEDA are well known for the intelligence community for a long period of time.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State now, gave a speech before the Trump administration left office outlining that Iran-Al-QAEDA relationship, which is apparently growing pretty strong.
The Iranians has the ability to use Al-QAEDA as a subcontractor to take revenge. And in that sense, from an Iranian perspective, I can see only benefits. It can be a big one, a big attack. It can be one that will echo from side to side. The Iranian, of course, will be totally immune because everybody will say, oh, no, it's not the Iranians because it's the Sunni Al-QAEDA, and everybody knows that Sunnis and Shiites hate each other guts, which is quite correct. But in the case of Al-QAEDA in Iran, it's only part of the story. And actually, this is a path that I would say, when I'm trying to think from an Iranian perspective, this is a path that I would not rule out. And one last thing in that context, reminding ourselves, the Iranians are marathon runners. The leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, said the other day, we will take the revenge, Iran will take the revenge in the right time and in the right circumstances. We have to take it into consideration. It could be something that the Iranians are brewing for a long period of time, and we should take it very seriously.
Speaking of Iran's proxies and various ways in which they could, God forbid, attack Israel or U.S. interests in the region, the Houthis in Yemen and also these radical Shia militias in Iraq. Now, the Israel Defense Forces have expressed a lot of concerns about potential attacks coming from those Iranian proxies in Yemen and Iraq. How is that kind of a game changer as we move forward?
Israel's geostrategic boundaries are not the one that you see on the map. Israel's geostrategic boundaries today are in the east, Iran, and in the south, Yemen. And the reason I'm saying that is that the common denominator is that both in Iran as well as in Yemen, and in addition to that, of course, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and Gaza Strip, what Israel is facing today is an increasing, accumulating Iranian severe threat in the shape of massively armed Iranians proxies. You mentioned the Houthis in Yemen. We are all familiar with Hezbollah in Lebanon. There are Iraqi militias, Shiite Iraqi militias that are massively supported by the Iranians, and they are acting as their subcontractors. I'm not sure that many people in the West understand it, but what happened in the last couple of years is that Iran has built an army of terror of dozens and thousands of militants scattered in different parts of the Middle East. They are massively armed with the newest weapons the Iranians can provide them with, and that presents a very significant challenge to the whole region.
Tough to say, obviously. Things are just starting with the new administration, but how does this change the landscape of the Middle East right now? And how does the Iranian regime feel? Do they perhaps feel emboldened with the new administration coming in?
Let me try to reflect to you how it's looked from the region. Let me start with the easiest thing. If you screen across the region, I'm talking about the major Arab states, the Gulf monarchies, Egypt, and I'm adding to that Israel. They are all one way or another intimidated by the Iranians' expansion. They look at the new administration, and one of the most significant parameters they are looking at the new administration is whether this administration is going back to the days of President Barack Obama. And there is a lot of concern among, as you can understand, Gulf states, Egypt, and Israel, that people in the environment of President Biden will be kind of like pushing towards more and more policy that resembles the policy of President Barack Obama. And that causes a lot of concern, both in Israel as well as in the Arab Gulf monarchies. The Iranian plan is very simple, is to establish in an irreversible way its control on the ground using its ballistic missiles and precision weapon, together with the deployment of these armies of terror that I mentioned before. And when the time comes, they could continue and operate uninterrupted and unthreatened because there will be an Iranian nuclear umbrella. And the Western negotiators, for reasons that are beyond my comprehension, basically failed to see that or didn't want to see that.
Thanks again to Avi for joining us. Up next, the international spokesman for the Israel Defense Forces, is here to share one of the greatest threats facing Israel today. Find out what it is after the break. Don't move.
CUFI's mission is to educate and empower millions of American Christians to speak with one voice in defense of Israel and the Jewish people. There's several ways you can learn more about Israel every day through CUFI's dynamic resources. The CUFI Coffee Break is a weekly bite-sized Israel lesson delivered to your email inbox. Dive into topics like the forgotten Jewish refugees, Israel's agricultural communities called kibbutzim, and the Hamas rocket threat, with options to dig deeper each week. Every lesson can be read in under 5 minutes while you're making a cup of coffee. Plus, stay informed on all the latest news out of Israel and how it affects you by subscribing to CUFI's Daily Briefing. It's a daily news roundup of important Israel-related headlines, so you're always up to date when it comes to Israel. Follow CUFI on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram for daily content, including videos, news articles, breaking news, devotionals, fun facts, and more.
Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us. There is so much to talk about, but let's start with Iran. Why is it so crucial that Iran and Hezbollah do not establish a foothold on the Golan Heights near Israel's border? And how is the Assad regime in Syria helping them?
Let's zoom out a bit and think about what Iran is trying to achieve. They have spent billions of dollars over many years in trying to bridge one big challenge that they have. The big challenge is that Iran is over here and Israel is here, and they're trying to gap more than 600 miles of a distance. Now, they've got two ways in which they do that. One is by using proxy organizations like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. And the other way is by forwarding military capabilities from Iran into Syria and then trying to attack Israel using either Syria as a launch pad or Lebanon as a launch pad. Now, I'm sure that you know and remember very well, but I don't know if everybody in the crowd remembers that Iran has already tried and attacked Israel 6 times in the last 2 years. All of those attacks came from Syria, which also means that the Assad regime is responsible for those attacks. All of those attacks were thwarted by the IDF. Fortunately, there were no casualties and no substantial damage. And as you also know, every time they attacked us, we made sure to retaliate in kind and make sure that they get the message that attacking Israel from Syria is an exercise in futility and that we won't allow the Iranians to establish themselves militarily in Syria and to open up a second front in the north against Israel.
Jonathan, tell us why these precision-guided munitions, or PGMs, would be a potential game changer if Hezbollah got its hands on them. And tell us a bit more, if you can, about Hezbollah's overall capabilities.
So PGMs, or precision-guided munitions, are basically advanced rockets. What they mean is that if you have an old rocket, which you place in a location, you aim it, and then you fire it, you can't really control it in mid-air, and the chances of actually hitting your intended target are statistic. And in order to actually hit the target, you have to fire many rockets if you're a terrorist. The big difference with PGMs are that you can fire them and you steer them in flight, and they have a target area of about 150 feet. Now imagine a terrorist organization like Hezbollah having the ability to strike almost pinpoint accuracy any target in Israel. Imagine utilities, imagine ports, airports, imagine our symbols of state, and imagine the most sensitive areas in Israel, all within range and all within capacity of Hezbollah to attack. That is why we are so adamant about the fact that this is a strategic threat against Israel. And as General Kelman told us about before. It's something that we're operating day and night using our excellent intelligence and using our Air Force and other assets that we have at our disposal to negate and make sure that this will not actually turn into a threat that will menace Israeli civilians and endanger our economy and our most sensitive facilities.
Folks, precision-guided missiles are obviously a major threat posed by Iran, but there is an even greater menace from the Ayatollahs. Coming up, we'll talk to the man who served as the Trump administration's top official for countering Iran's nuclear weapons program. Stick around.
Christians United for Israel is the largest pro-Israel organization in the United States with over 10 million members. But we are still missing one: you. As a member of CUFI, you'll be part of a growing movement that's catching fire across the nation as Christians discover the biblical importance of standing with Israel and the Jewish people. You can defend Israel virtually by responding to CUFI's action alerts and sharing CUFI's pro-Israel content on social media. You can support Israel locally by hosting a CUFI event at your church. Get involved nationally by attending our Washington, D.C. summit, or visit the Holy Land with CUFI on a life-changing Israel tour. Visit www.cufi.org or call to help ensure that the relationship between Israel and the United States remains strong and secure. It's a movement for such a time as this.
Welcome back. He was the Trump administration's point man on countering Iran's nuclear weapons program. And with Iran now enriching uranium at dangerous levels that could lead to a nuclear bomb, Richard Goldberg's analysis could not be more timely. He joined us recently on a TBN special called Light in the Darkness: The Rise of the Iranian Church. Take a look. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. So much to talk about when it comes to Iran and its nuclear program, which you are a foremost expert on. But hey, let's start on the recent death of Iran's top nuclear scientist, the man called the father of the Iranian bomb, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, gunned down in the streets of Iran recently. How big was his death? What are the implications of it?
Well, it's a big deal on multiple levels. First, for the nuclear program. As you said, this is the father of their nuclear weapons program, what we call the Ahmad plan. We don't know much about how it ended, how it was suspended, what activities have continued all the way from the 2000s to today. But we do know that this is the person who has been at the top of the pyramid. He has continued to lead a secret military organization that employs nuclear weapons scientists. And without him, and also remember, the Israelis also took out that big secret nuclear weapons archive out of Iran back in 2018. Mm-hmm. There is a big brain drain going on for their nuclear weapons program. And also a big question to ask: how did this happen? This is a tightly controlled, repressive regime with a huge security apparatus. The fact that this man at the top of their nuclear weapons program could be assassinated inside Iran is a big, big deal and shows that there's a lot of decay going on inside the Iranian government.
Yeah, Richard, that's a great point. What a black eye for the regime. And you think about 2020, started with the death of the terror kingpin, Qasem Soleimani. Now Fakhrizadeh is taken out. Very interesting. How is Iran violating that Iranian nuclear deal, which was originally signed in 2015? The United States pulled out of it in 2018. Can you tell us how they are blatantly violating that deal?
You're right. The Iranians are violating that nuclear deal. And the truth is they've been violating it from day one. What's in the news today that we see are the most obvious signals. That is all this enrichment you hear about, the production of fissile material that, if enriched further, could be used to build nuclear weapons. But we also have the more fundamental violations, the mistrust, the deceit coming out of Iran. The International Atomic Energy Agency is now telling us they have evidence that Iran has been hiding undeclared nuclear sites, activities, and materials from day one of this nuclear agreement. And Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who we just talked about, was on top of that food pyramid of what could be some ongoing secret nuclear weapons related work. So yes, they're violating the deal. They're not just violating the deal because of Donald Trump or because of sanctions. They've been violating the deal since day one of the deal.
What is the world doing? We know the United States under President Trump obviously pulled out of that Iran nuclear deal in 2018. What about the world, the international community, Europe, Russia, China? Are they doing anything to hold the Iranian regime accountable for these clear violations of that nuclear deal?
They are not, unfortunately. The Iran nuclear deal at its core was sort of an extortion racket where you have this thug regime, think of the mob that's involved in all kinds of malign activities, illicit conduct, terrorism, and missiles, and militias, and all kinds of things, plus this nuclear program. And they scare you with the nuclear program. You know, we could make a nuclear bomb. We, this terror-sponsoring regime, could have a nuclear weapon. You better give us money. And unfortunately, that sort of racket works in Europe and with many in Washington. And that's what the nuclear deal is. You pay them to slow down on enrichment, but that money goes to feed terrorism and missiles.
Richard, we know that Iran is marching across the Middle East right now. It's not only on its own, but through proxy like Hezbollah, Hamas. We know they are committed to destroying the state of Israel. But why should every American watching right now be concerned about this Iranian regime and that nuclear program? I think sometimes here in the States we have a tendency to say, well, that's far away, thousands of miles away. It's a problem for Israel and for Saudi Arabia, but not for us. You mentioned ballistic missiles a bit earlier. Why should Americans care about this Iranian nuclear threat?
Well, let's always keep in mind that there are two Satans, according to the Islamic Republic of Iran, a little Satan and a big Satan. Israel is the little Satan. Guess who the big Satan is? The United States of America. They have been at war with us in the way that they wage a war for 40 years. That has not stopped since the founding of the Islamic Republic. If you know somebody who lost a loved one in Iraq, they probably died at the hands of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Iranian paramilitary terror organization that planted bombs throughout Iraq to kill American soldiers. They are preparing, as you just talked about, ballistic missiles and cruise missiles that could hit U.S. bases, U.S. forces. We've seen U.S. personnel killed in Iraq over the last year and a half. And of course, they could wipe out our allies, starting with the Jewish state of Israel. So this is a threat to the United States at its core. Israel is the canary in the coal mine. And if we don't answer the call when she is threatened, obviously we're next.
Yeah, and Richard, you played such a key role in countering this Iranian threat. Thank you for your excellent work there and at FDD, and excellent information today. You made it very easy to understand, Richard. Thanks. We'll see you again soon. Now, if you'd like to catch our entire interview with Richard Goldberg, watch Light in the Darkness, The Rise of the Iranian Church at tbn.org. There's a lot of uncertainty as we head into 2021, but if there's one thing you can bank on, it's that the Middle East never sleeps. As this year marches on, you'll continue to hear of wars and rumors of wars, and threats against Israel and America will increase. We live in perilous times, no doubt, but these are also Bible times, and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will never leave us or forsake us. For followers of Jesus, Psalm 18 is a great reminder that we can face the future with confidence and not fear. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge. He is my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. Folks, remind yourself of this when you start to feel anxious in these uncertain times. Remember, through it all, God still sits on the throne. Thanks for joining us this week here on The Watchman. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.